Welcome to the Keeping IT Real podcast. This podcast features honest and transparent conversations about what it takes to manage corporate technology and expenses today. Each episode, listen to true and personal stories from IT professionals who are working hard to make sure their business stays connected and competitive. I'm your host, Jethro Castillo, and let's meet our next guest. Today, I am joined by Elliott Adler, the Director of IT at MedRite Urgent Care, a rapidly growing healthcare provider offering walk-in services across multiple states. Elliott is a seasoned IT leader with a strong background in building infrastructure, enhancing security, and driving digital transformation in fast-paced environments. Elliott, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's actually a pleasure to meet you. When I got to know your podcast, I've actually listened to a lot of the episodes, and it's definitely been very, very informative to hear, the struggles that other IT professionals have, that we're all in the same boat.
You guys are all, I'm the host, right? So I've been through a lot. You guys are all in the same boat, and it's very interesting to listen to. So, Elliott, how exactly did you get started in the world of IT?
To be honest, my first exposure to IT, and I'm dating myself, we took a family trip to Boston once to the MIT museum. And honestly, we were playing with the technology. And I was a kid. It was before computers were commonplace in everybody's house. Yes, I am dating myself here. And I remember just playing around with the technology. We walked out. My mother turned to my father and said, "Hey, we got to embrace this." It was, this company Dell was just, relatively new. With the home PCs, we ordered a computer thereafter. I learned, I remember learning basic programming, literally the language BASIC, with books from the local library. When it came to, college and technical school, which I went to afterwards for programming and developing, just the technology, which just, fascinated me. So my first job was actually in the era of Y2K. I joined my first company as a developer to help bring their ERP system Y2K compliant, the day that the world was going to stop and everything was going to turn black and white, which never happened. But from there, I just scaled. To be honest, the company was operating on a single SCO SCO Unix server, probably the size of a mini fridge. And when I left that company many years later, we were completely virtualized. It was just a great transformation. Just take something that was literally black and white, from a character-based screen and bring it to the virtual world. It was just fascinating. When you look back, you're like, hey, we were involved in doing this. Yeah.
I am curious on that note because also I love how you brought up Dell and you're like, oh, this company named Dell. Dell, one of the biggest personal computer companies in the world now. Just, Dell. I don't know if you've heard of Dell.
Right. Have you heard of them? Yeah.
But, I would imagine when technology like that, when the computers were invented, and I'm dating myself in the reverse direction. I was born in 1998, and so Y2K, I don't remember. So all I know is technology worked still through the 99 to the 00.
Right.
But you kind of talked about, taking it from a character-based system to not that, going from black and white to not that, must have been such a revolutionary sort of change, right? And I think, my generation and beyond kind of takes this thing for granted, right? I think kids nowadays are born with, kids nowadays are born with phones and that's all they know and they think it's normal. But literally like 20 years ago, the smartphone, the iPhone did not exist. I wonder though, for you, does that excitement, that joy in seeing technology advance, has that gone away? I feel like back in the day, it was such a sharp jump and now it's faster, but it's more incremental and we almost take it for granted. Do you still have the same thrill transforming digitally technology in general?
Not really, because technology is something that just keeps really morphing and you can't get bored. I remember years ago, my wife cut out this comic strip, from a newspaper, from a physical newspaper. It was a mother, calling the kids on their phone. Emailing the kids. That's what it was. That dinner's ready. And this is going back probably to 98. About then, it was always hanging on our fridge. We always reflect on that. This is the era we live in. Dinner time is whatever. You text your kids, okay, dinner's ready now. Where did that communication go? Interpersonal communication go? It's like But on the other hand, the world's smaller, like because of it, for better or for worse, let's put it that way. But you could communicate with people. You could work with people that are in foreign countries just like that. And, it's all seamless. But on the other hand, you lose that interpersonality. I remember growing up, you didn't call people after 10 o'clock at night. Yes, I am. Again, I just have a tendency of doing that. The words was more, I guess, of a family structure and a weekend structure. But again, it's just the way the world's going. It's such a fast pace, which again, from the IT standpoint, I dread it to a certain extent. Because with all these new technologies do definitely come risks from the cybersecurity endpoint. And yeah, change is great. But on the hand, we have to look at the full picture here.
I do love how you said that you were dating yourself, and the whole dating yourself is the idea that we shouldn't call people past 10, and that we have, because it's that home phone and it'll wake everybody up, and then you have kind of just that weekend sort of lifestyle. But I don't even think that's an 8. I think I don't want to be called after a certain time during the day. I kind of want my own thing. I think the other thing that I wanted to say is we're closer to people that are further away from us, but I feel like we're further than ever from the people that are closest to us. And I think that's the technology sort of dynamic that we have to work out, is like you said, we lose that interpersonal, but the world is smaller. The world is smaller, but that means that almost in our smallest circle, we almost take that for granted.
That's such a great way. That's such a great way of putting it.
Yeah. And I think it's something we have to normalize and adjust to, in my opinion. If I'm allowed to say this at my age, right, and be like, oh, I think we should go backwards. But, for better or for worse, that is always kind of the phrase that is sort of associated with technology. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, and you said, you dread kind of the tech, but also the tech is exciting. And it's that duality that's a little confusing. For you, what are you most excited about when it comes to IT and tech moving forward? But then also to that dreading part, what are you most concerned about with IT and tech, both business related and personally?
So business related, listen, it's great. Especially in our role here, we're able to bring medicine to people's houses. You have people that are homebound, or you have people that just can't get to the center, they're not well. We're able to help people, we're able to manage people's care a lot better. But again, obviously when you expand the perimeters and there's no longer those cinder block walls around it, you're always asking for cybersecurity risks, which unfortunately is very, very prevalent this day and age, especially when you're housing people's personal information and people's, medical information. We take this very, very seriously for the reason of that. People are entrusting us. And, on the other hand, we have to do right by our patients, both medically and both personally.
So let's talk about that. And I always find when I get to interview people in the medical industry, the healthcare industry, super interesting, because you guys you have HIPAA, and you also have to deal with very, very sensitive data, because it's my personal health history and everyone's personal health history. So if you don't mind, I kind of want to hear what your day-to-day looks like as kind of the director of IT at MedRite, at a healthcare urgent care sort of space. What is it like being kind of in charge of IT at a place like that?
No 2 days match each other, and I start my day with my list of, okay, I actually start my week. This is, how I focus. This is what I like to accomplish this week. These are again, as you take further steps, you always have to go backwards and make sure we didn't disrupt any process that we had in the past. And you always have to be going backwards and making sure, you're everything's still secure, and make sure you're up to date with updates and, new patches that are coming out, because the attackers never stop. But again, we all start with a wonderful plan. This is our plan. This is our focus of this week. But the days take their way, just the way they go. And Mondays, of course, are always the worst. Me and Garfield, we hate Mondays. But I've heard people hate Wednesdays, middle of the week, But again, the week just literally has a life of their own. Yes, there are the tasks that have to be accomplished, but that's one thing that I really love about it, is it doesn't get boring.
100%. You mentioned kind of, you have these tasks that you have to do to kind of keep the lights on. There's these tasks that you have to do to kind of move your company forward, and then there are things that you have to think about way down the line to transform your organization. How and I don't know how lean your IT team is. I just assume that all IT teams are lean and small relative to the size of the organization. Your face kind of looks like it is that. Also,
You
how
got
do you
that?
kind of, yeah, I've done this enough that it's that's just kind of the staple. How do you kind of prioritize everything? How do you make sure the right things happen at the right time, with resources being so limited?
So our focus here is patients first. At the end of the day, we're a healthcare company. We're giving over healthcare to our patients. Is actually in our motto is patients are first. Anything we do is always to the patient's focus. Again, if the lights aren't on in the center, if the center's not operating, obviously that's now affecting patient care. Besides, obviously the bottom line of the company, lights off on the center or computers not working are obviously key. But again, on the flip side, there's a lot of maintenance that has to go into place to keep those lights on. You don't want to be waking up every morning with problems. The idea is to avoid the problems. Again, failure to plan is the plan to fail, as wise people say. It's you always got to be planning. You have to have plans in place. What if? Obviously these are playbooks we don't want to pull out of the closet, but you need plans for as many episodes as many situations as you could. So you're not scrambling. To scramble just doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. I feel like as a head of IT, you have a really, really pertinent role in having to do a lot with a little. And so it's always interesting to hear, um, exactly how you guys figure out how to do that. I feel like you go into IT wanting to do tech. If you climb up the ladder to where you are, it's not just tech. You also have to understand people, and then you have to understand people related to tech and tech related to people. So,
which is another fascinating thing about that, a leadership role and the technology role. We tilt the gamut. You have sales, you have psychology in here, project management. Again, it's easy to say no, 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 right? People hate you. They're gonna, with the era of shadow IT, they're gonna find everybody could Google a solution, right? So everybody's gonna go ahead and find a way around it. The idea is to keep a balance of, yes, we have to keep our environment secure. We have to keep the lights on. We have to worry about our patient care. We have to worry about, but on the other hand, employees have to be happy.
yes.
Which is the key. Like everybody wants the latest gadget. You get a keyboard for one person. Certainly, everybody puts in a request. But yeah, I'm just using that as a silly example. But again, there's always everybody. The grass is always greener and then for whatever reason. But it's a matter of sitting with employees and understanding what they really need and providing it as much as we could within the framework of budgetary, security, and what's really correct for the company.
Yeah, so how do you, and you kind of alluded to it, how do you find that balance? Because you could be the bad guy as the IT guy, and some IT teams are the bad guys. Like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. You don't get access to that. You don't get access to that. If you want access to that, you're going to have to request it, and then our team has to get to it, and I'm sorry if that slows you down. But at the same time, you need to be able to make sure that your IT infrastructure is stable and secure while also making your employees happy. How do you exactly balance?
When I started this job, I had a full headed hair. It's again, it's a balance. Again, the biggest thing is communication. There's no one this day and age that does not understand the need for security, and the security is no longer just a lock on the door,
or a baseball bat,
which is always my favorite go-to. But it's there's no one this day and age, even a simple, I wouldn't call it simple, but everybody has a bank account, multi-factor. They're always tracking, requiring password changes. These are not, out of the box, new technology. This has been around, and people have to understand. And we try to explain this as much as we could. We do trainings, we do webinars, and we explain to the employees, is that the key is we got to start with the basics, and everybody's on that team. There's no security team. Everybody's a player on that team. Everybody has to be looking out for security, whether as simple as leaving a patient's chart on a desk. That's a breach of security, a breach of HIPAA. Like these are little things that might just think that are just simple accidents. Accidents can't happen in certain areas, and that's why everybody has to be on the team. Everybody has to be educated, and everybody has to be kept up to date as much as you could.
I have a few follow-up questions to that, but I want to see if this question will kind of add to that. For you personally, Elliott, what is kind of the biggest challenge you're facing in your role in your company right now, and how are you and your team tackling that?
One of the biggest things that I think everybody's tackling this, for better for worse, this terminology AI, whatever it means, because I think it's the biggest marketing buzzword out there. But what's stopping an employee from trying to write so you could Google anything, you could find anything online now. But if somebody wants to circumvent or find a hack, find a back door, you can type it into ChatGPT, or you have employees trying to simply, and a lot of them just can't stop. They're running a report. They'll, put into ChatGPT to help form the wording a lot better. You just possibly expose patients' information without realizing. Again, you could, like I said, you could put stone walls up. You could build brick walls. As I once heard on the podcast, we could build 6-foot walls. The hackers are coming. The bad people are coming. The bad actors are coming with 7-foot ladders. They're going to get past you somehow. The idea is to put as many stumbling blocks as we could. But on the other hand, the shadow IT, which is your own employees, are a very big risk in this day and age. Everybody wants to get their job done easier, and I don't blame them. If I'd be in their shoes, listen, I don't want to be told no. I don't want to hit roadblocks. I'm here to do a job, see patients quickly. Again, we hope our waiting rooms are full, but our goal is to get people in and out quickly. I'm going to do anything in my power if I'm the provider, to do that. But again, on the other hand, we have to realize that, there's consequences to every action.
So I'm curious because I feel like, without even trying, cybersecurity has been a huge focus of you and kind of what we've talked about for the last however long. As much detail as you're willing to go into, kind of what does your cybersecurity look like, and how do you implement it? Is it like zero trust? Is it something else? How do you go about this?
Again, like, obviously, I'm not going to spill the beans because that's the first step of cybersecurity.
Exactly. No, 100%.
Not releasing
100%.
And one thing I think which has affected the IT world also is the plethora of tools that each specialize in one thing. You can't manage that many tools effectively. The goal is to go with a couple tried and true tools that fit the gamut, do it well, and make sure you stay on top of your tools. Again, obviously, zero trust, passwording, MFA. Of course, these are the ABCs. You always got to go back to the basics. Again, you miss the basics, you're going to build a weak foundation. The building is going to collapse. So you really got to worry about your basics, education. Like I said, everybody's a team player when it comes to security.
Oh, we hope so.
Right.
That's what we want to implement. I kind of want to, and obviously you've listened to this podcast, and some guests get this question, some guests don't because we run out of time. It's a two-parter. We'll start with the first one. Could you share kind of an IT project that you've worked on in the past, whether for this company or another company, that kind of you're proud of, or like made a significant impact on the business that you were working for at the time?
So we've definitely used automation significantly here to help. Like you said, as every IT department suffers from lack of resources, lack of budget, we've implemented as much automation as we could to actually help us keep the costs down, effectively deliver our deliverables, and not have to sweat it. No one wants to be here till 10 o'clock at night. No one wants to be here past 6 o'clock. But again, it's automate as much as you could. Obviously, with automation, you have to make sure it's secure and locked down, because the bad actors get in your automation, and then you really got bigger problems. So it's the key is automation and keeping things as standardized as possible, and that's something we've really strived here. When I joined MedRite, we were in a hyper growth phase. The biggest thing was, and I remember talking to one of the VPs, and I said, we have to look at building a new center as IKEA, that we have everything in a warehouse. These are the, you tell the warehouse manager or whoever is in charge, take these 10 boxes. Yes, we'll be missing a screw. It's just the nature of the beast. You're going to be missing one little piece. You'll have to implement. You'll have to get around it. But again, keeping things standardized make updating, making sure everything's secure so much easier when everything matches. And that's something we've definitely strived for here.
I kind of want to combine this with the previous thing you were talking about. Communication is super important, but I don't think it's enough to just say communication is important. It's how you communicate. And you had mentioned that you kind of want to sit with your employees and listen to them and figure out exactly what they need. And also at the same time, you want to be able to know, talking about automation, the right things to automate to actually make the jobs of your employees easier. So what does you and your team do to make sure that you are doing the right things for your organization and not just doing something you think is cool, but no one actually really cares?
Again, a lot of these ideas originate in the field. We try, again, we have 30 centers is a lot, but we try quarterly, some of them a little further out. So it's only a few times a year. We try to go out, actually go to the centers and see what's going on, which is the key. I've already been in a center, sat down, they had a long line just to feel where the issues are. We went back to our EHR company and said, hey, help us out. No one stand in line to be registered. It just slows down the process. Everything is KPI driven nowadays, which is, and the same way, we need to help. Our center managers are held accountable, keep patients flow moving, that's the business, right? So yes, while we're looking at our patient, we do have a bottom line we have to worry about. There is the financial aspect to everything. You can't have somebody walk out because the line was too long. That just cool. We weren't there for the patient when they needed us.
Yeah. And obviously, it's an obvious statement, but people and finances aren't mutually exclusive. Like if you weren't making the money, you wouldn't be able to take care of any of these patients, right? And so you need to make that money to take care of the patients, but also you kind of care about the patients first. So it is this, you've said the word already, balance, right? To figure out how all of that kind of works in tandem. The second part of that previous question, and you probably know where it's going, is, sharing that successful project that provided a lot of impact and just making lives easier. What is a project maybe that you've worked on that didn't go as planned, but it became kind of a really good learning experience for you or your team, and you kind of are better because of it?
Again, way back when when I was actually in my previous company, we did have projects that when we were implementing a ERP system, there was buy-in from management, there wasn't, but that's when I learned the need. And that, I guess, was the biggest lesson I learned, take away from there, is how every party has to be on. There's no, again, I was working with the management company, with the upper management on this, but even upper management cannot ram a tool down anybody's throat. This is how we're going, especially coming from, we were on a antiquated system, moving to a relatively state-of-art system. People don't like change. So, again, you need buy-in from the end users. Everybody has to understand where we're going and why we're going. And this is the trip that we're taking. If you have a train that's going two different directions, you're not going to land up anywhere, right? So,
when you first started falling in love with tech, you fell in love with tech, right? And you were a huge tech person. You were programming in BASIC very early on, stuff like that. When did the transition into kind of the leadership role happen, the people part of it happen? And was it natural to you, or did you have to learn additional skills to be able to translate what you're doing in tech to then apply it to people?
So actually, the transition actually took in 3 steps. So I actually started as my life in IT as a developer. Didn't really care for it that much. Actually, once it became, I guess, became my job. I actually transitioned, like I said, this company that I was working for in those days was still on a SCO Unix server. SCO Unix was actually going out of business at that time. We had to transition into either another Unix, to keep up with the update, or Linux. At that point, Red Hat Linux, which is another company that you don't hear much of anymore. They were the kings of the castle. So we moved it. I remember transitioning at the same time. Okay, so now we need new hardware. We have to build infrastructure. And again, this company, Microsoft, was still on early developing. There was more novel works in those novel networks in those days. It was early on, even the whole authentication. And we went with we built out a Linux server. At that point, employees needed email. Okay, let's build out a QMail, Linux server, QMail server. We built that with all these little tools. Linux. At some point, we're like, okay, now we're going to marry everything together. That's when I just started really enjoying this. Like, okay, this relatively new phenomenon, coming to the small business called Active Directory. In those days, only the big players had it. Okay, how could we integrate? Okay, once we're integrating, there's something called Exchange. That's, coming out. Let's get that into, at a certain point, we're like, okay, we're housing all this. We have a stack of 5 servers, this, that. How are we, how are we dealing with the power outage? How are we dealing with Hurricane Sandy that hit New York? Okay, where are we having our redundancy? I really actually enjoyed all that change. So at that point, okay, let's get into the cloud. Let's look how we could save. It just sort of became a natural building a team to support it. And, again, going into management, understanding people. I like to consider myself, even though I'm a techie, yes, I try to converse with people, try to talk to people. I've definitely read books, but again, you can read whatever you want. Is putting it into action.
Yeah.
And my team has made me better. I remember having one guy sit me down and, hey, that wasn't cool. Again, I've learned more from my teams than I've learned from anybody. And you got to learn from everybody, so it was, I do definitely give credit to CFO that I had in my previous company. I remember sitting down with him. He's like, okay, let's look how you would approach this. I give him a lot of credit from being more than just a number cruncher, being a human and learning a lot from him. Coming here to MedRite, there was a great team, a great VP. I've learned from so many people here. You got to keep learning, which is, again, in line with tech, is you stay stagnant, you just drown.
Yeah.
The key is to keep learning, learn from everybody. Yes, everybody has good things to teach everybody. And if I think more people did, I think the world would be a lot better place.
Agreed. If we just listened to each other and we learned from each other and we grew from each other, this world would be impeccable for sure. Elliott, moving forward, what are kind of the biggest priorities and challenges for you? And how do they support the business?
Again, like I said, our motto is patients first. That's what we live and breathe here. Is any way we can impact the patient's journey through our centers is key. We have gone into new streams of medicine, whether it's bringing medicine to people's houses that are inbound, managing patients that have multiple different diseases. Again, with that come new challenges. We're sending people out to the field. We're sending people to patients' houses. How are we providing technology that's obviously light? People are, New York City, commuting via mass transit, not driving to people's houses. They can always find parking. So, okay, how can we now use technology, lightweight, bring it to the patient's houses? Once again, with that comes tech support. Somebody comes to treat a patient in somebody's house. How are we supporting the tech? If they have an issue, what are we doing now? What's the backup plan? How are we there for our patients? Once again, keeping that all secure as well.
Yeah.
When like we said, we get out of those 4 walls, security, becomes twice as full. How we handle somebody who loses an iPad on a train. These all require policies, procedures in place, and quick actionable, steps of how are we addressing these needs.
Yeah. This is kind of going to be the most forward question of the questions. Other than Mondays, what about work stresses you out?
I actually like what I do.
Nice.
To be honest, I know it sounds so coy, but I actually enjoy tech. I enjoy working with people. I enjoy what I do. Again, no one likes deadlines. The idea is to have your project run on time, meet the time frames that you have, meet the deliverables when they have to be delivered. But again, as long as you communicate with people, I think your day is a lot better, and it avoids a lot of the stress.
I would agree with that. If you talk with others, that definitely helps a lot for sure. Makes your job easier. Makes your life easier, I would say too. Okay, so this is this is the final question. Imagine that you're talking to an IT leader, not like an up and coming budding IT professional or someone who's trying to enter the workforce. Your peer, an IT leader. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned over your career that you think would be important to impart upon one of your peers so that they can do their job better?
Run fast. Yeah. Again, IT people are boring people. Most of us, you know, I don't know. You take two IT people. What are you talking about? The latest and greatest server out there. But again, if I would be mentoring, which I do encourage my team, learn something new every day. Even when we had a much larger in-house tech support team, I didn't like the concept of having level 1 techs, level 2 techs, and this is all you do. Everybody needs to get their hands on new projects. Everybody needs to, learn new skills. Don't just stay in one box. And I think early on in my career was actually a mistake I did make a little bit early on. Yes, as I was growing with technology, maybe I wasn't open to learning certain new technologies, scared to touch certain technologies. Lab it out. With virtualization nowadays, it's so much easier to build a lab. I had the days that I had 4 switches sitting on my desk with a router. I wanted to learn networking. It was one of my biggest hurdles at the beginning was scared to touch network. What if I bring everybody down? We have 150 employees. What if I bring everybody down? I just cost the company who knows what. Okay, let's build a lab. My first lab was built on equipment from eBay. Again, obviously kept segregated, not part of the regular network. And I learned a lot of technologies, and I've told people so many times, if you didn't break it and then have to repair it, you didn't learn it. The easy thing is lab it up, and this is what I encourage my employees to do. Try everything in the sandbox first. Know what the technology is, learn it, and then let's deploy it. Everybody's scared of the unknown. Let's make sure there's as few unknowns as possible.
Oh, yes, exactly. That's so good. I love that. Before we close, any final thoughts from you, just in general?
We're here to embrace, technology. That's obviously what we're talking about. It's great. The fact that no 2 days are the same. It's just the bigger thing is, if the world would be more communicable and people would be nicer to each other, it would definitely be a lot nicer place. We wouldn't have so many bad actors out there trying to hack each other,
Yeah, 100%. Well, Elliott, thank you so much for your time. This was, you call yourself boring, but this conversation I was definitely smiling and laughing the whole time. You have a very entertaining way of kind of delivering what you want to talk about. So maybe you think you're boring, but I don't find you boring, and I don't think the people around you find you boring. So I just want to say thank you for your entertainment, but also your knowledge and your thoughts and everything you had to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this Keeping IT Real episode, and thank you for listening. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. This podcast is all about celebrating and connecting professional heroes who work hard at IT every day. To continue the conversation and learn how VCOM can help you better buy, manage, and pay for your technology, visit us at vcomsolutions.com. Until next time.